Betty and Barney Hill were an American couple who claimed that extraterrestrials abducted them in the state of New Hampshire in the United States on the 19th of September 1961. The incident came to be called the Hill Abduction and the Zeta Reticuli incident. The story of the abduction was adapted into a best-selling book, The Interrupted Journey, which published in 1966. The couple lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney was employed by the United States Postal Service, while Betty was a social worker. They were Unitarians and members of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Barney also sat on a local board of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. The alleged UFO sighting and the subsequent abduction happened about 10:30 p.m. on the 19th of September 1961. The Hills were driving back to Portsmouth from vacation, and just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire, Betty saw a bright point of light in the sky that moved from below the moon and the planet Jupiter upward to the west of the moon. That time Betty thought that she was observing a falling star, only it moved upward. Because it moved erratically and grew bigger and bigger, Betty asked Barney to stop the car for a closer look, and also to walk their dog, Delcy, who was traveling in the car with the couple. Barney stopped at the picnic area just south of the Twin Mountain. Betty grabbed her binoculars and discovered an odd-shaped craft in the sky, which was flashing multicolored lights whilst traveling across the face of the moon. That time Betty thought it might be a flying saucer that she was observing. Betty then passed the binoculars to Barney, who had the chance to observe the craft, which he reasoned was a commercial airliner, but soon he changed his mind because without looking as if it had turned, the craft rapidly descended in his direction. His observation caused Barney to realize that the object was not a plane. The Hills said they continued driving on a quiet and isolated road, moving very slowly through Franconia Notch in order to observe the object as it came even closer. At one point, the object passed above the restaurant and a signal tower on the top of Cannon Mountain and came out near the Old Man of the Mountain, which was a series of 5 granite cliff ledges on Cannon Mountain that appeared to be a profile of a human face when viewed from the north. Betty stated that it was at least 1.5 times the length of the granite cliff profile, which was about 40 feet or 12 meters long, and that it seemed to be rotating. The couple watched as the silent, illuminated craft moved erratically and bounced back and forth in the night sky. Soon, the object suddenly descended toward their vehicle, causing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway. The huge, silent craft hovered about 80 to 100 feet, 24 to 30 meters above their vehicle, the 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, and filled the entire field of view in the windshield. Barney was carrying his pistol in his pocket, got out of his vehicle and started to move closer to the object. Using binoculars, Barney claimed to have seen 8 to 11 humanoid figures behind the craft's windows who seemed to look at him. In unison, all but one figure moved to what appeared to be a panel on the rear wall of the hallway that encircled the front portion of the craft. The one remaining figure continued to look at Barney and communicated a message telling him to stay where you are and keep looking. Barney had a recollection of observing the humanoid forms wearing glossy black uniforms and black caps. Red lights on what appeared to be a batwing fins began to telescope out of the sides of the craft, and the long structure descended from the bottom of the craft. The craft then silently approached what Barney estimated was within 50 to 80 feet, or 15 to 24 meters. overhead and 300 feet or 91 meters away from him. Barney, fearing being captured by these creatures, ran back to the car. Barney was terrified and quickly started to speed away with the car. They heard a strange beeping sound and they fell into a daze. When they awoke, they realized they now just outside the capital of New Hampshire, Concord. A month later, on the 21st of October, Barney reported this to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP, investigator Walter Webb, that the beings he was able to observe were somehow not human. They arrived home at about dawn, and they both felt some odd sensations and impulses they could not explain. Betty stated that their luggage was found near the back door rather than in the main part of their house. Their watches, which they wore during the encounter, would never work again. Barney said that the leather strap for the binoculars was torn, though he could not recall it tearing. The toes of his best dressed shoes were scraped. Barney says he was compelled to examine his genitals in the bathroom, though he found nothing unusual. Later, they recalled that they took long showers to remove any possible contamination caused by the encounter, and each drew a picture of what they had observed. The Hills tried to reconstruct the chronology of the events as they witnessed the UFO, but immediately after they heard some kind of buzzing sounds, their memories became incomplete and fragmented. After sleeping for a few hours, Betty awoke and placed the shoes and clothing she had worn during the night into her closet, observing that the dress was torn in several places. Later, when retrieved the items from her closet, she noted a pinkish powder on the dress. She hung it on her clothesline, and the pink powder had slowly blown away by the wind, but the dress was irreparably damaged. Initially, she threw the dress away, but then changed her mind, retrieved the dress, hung it back in her closet. Over the years, several laboratories have conducted chemical and forensic analysis on the dress. The couple also noticed that there were shiny concentric circles on their car's trunk that had not been there the previous day. Betty and Barney said that the compass's needle would whirl rapidly if they moved it close to those spots. But when they moved it a few inches away from the shiny spots, it would drop down. So this was the account of the encounter of Betty and Barney, remembered right after it happened. But let's see how the rest of the story will unfold. At this stage, there was no mention of abduction, only an odd sighting of a strange aircraft. 2 days later, 2 days after the encounter, on the 21st of September, Betty contacted the Air Force and told them all she remembered. But there was no investigation concluded, as the case was dismissed with the official explanation that the sighting was a misidentification of Jupiter. Well, reporting it to the US Air Force officers went as one would expect. No wonder that the couple didn't try to report the story to anyone else until the Hills met Walter N. Webb, a Boston astronomer and member of the National Investigations Committee of Aerial Phenomena, or previously mentioned NICAP. On the 21st of October 1961, and in a 6-hour interview, the Hills told Walter all they could remember of the UFO encounter. Barney stated that he had developed a mental block and that he suspected there were some portions of the event that he did not wish to remember. He described in detail all he could remember about the craft, the appearance of the somehow not human figures on board of the craft. Webb later stated that they were telling the truth and the incident probably occurred exactly as they reported, except for some minor uncertainties and technicalities that must be tolerated in any such observations where human judgment is involved. Mentioned as an example, exact time and length of visibility, apparent sizes of objects and occupants, distance and height of objects. So, in my opinion, on Mr. Webb's conclusions about the encounter after the 6 hours interview with the couple, I believe that Mr. Webb had done an excellent job. He approached the couple with an open mind and with respect. He didn't want a sensational interview, he simply wanted to hear the story of Betty and Barney. At the end, he made a balanced conclusion, taking into account every possibility, including the possibility of uncertainties or other minor discrepancies. Then the story of the couple continued to unfold when in November 1961, Betty began writing down the details of her dreams, which she began having 10 days later after the encounter, which continued for 5 successive nights. She stated that she experienced them with a degree of detail and intensity that she had never had before. After the 5th night, the dream stopped and never recurred, though they occupied Betty's thoughts during the day. In one of those dreams, she and Barney encountered a roadblock and men who surrounded their car. Betty lost consciousness and struggled to regain it. Then she realized that she was being forced by 2 small men to walk in a forest at night, and of sleeping Barney walking behind her. Though when she called him, he seemed to be in a trance or sleepwalking. The men were about 5 feet to 5 feet 4 inches tall, which is about 152 to 164 centimeters. They wore matching uniforms with black caps similar to those worn by military cadets. They appeared nearly human, with black hair, dark eyes, prominent noses, and bluish lips. Their skin was a grayish color. Betty and Barney and the man walked up a ramp into a disc-shaped craft of metallic appearance. Once inside, Barney and Betty were separated. Betty remembered she first protested against them being separated, but she was then told by a man she called the leader that if she and Barney were examined together, it would take much longer to conduct the exams. She and Barney were taken to separate rooms then. Betty dreamt that another man, similar to the others, entered to conduct the exam with the leader. Betty called this man the examiner and said he had a pleasant, calm manner. Though the leader and the examiner spoke to her in English, the examiner's command of language seemed imperfect, and she had difficulty understanding him. Betty was able to ask the alien examiner where they came from, and tried unsuccessfully to take a book written in an unknown alphabet with her. The dream continued with Betty and Barney again taken to their car, where the leader of those men suggested that they wait to watch the craft's departure, which they did, and then resumed their drive home. Later in November, the Hills were again interviewed by NICAP members, this time by Sadie Jackson and Robert E. Hoffman. They read Webb's initial report and had many questions for the Hills. One of their main questions was about the length of the trip. Although the Hills had noted that they had arrived home later than anticipated, the 178-mile or 286-kilometer drive should have taken about 4 hours. They did not realize that they had arrived home 7 hours after their departure from Colebrook. When Hoffman and Jackson noted this discrepancy to the Hills, the couple had no explanation to this phenomenon. The Hills claimed to recall almost nothing of the 33 miles of U.S. road between Lincoln and Ashland. Both claimed to recall an image of a fiery orb sitting on the ground. Betty and Barney reasoned that it must have been the moon, but Hoffman and Jackson informed them that the moon had set earlier in the evening. At this point, the subject of hypnosis came up, and it was decided that it should be carried out in order to recover previously irretrievable memories. Barney was apprehensive, but thought it might help Betty to put to rest what Barney previously described as nonsense about her dreams. So this brings us to the hypnosis sessions, which both Betty and Barney had undergone in 1964, more than 2 years after the encounter. Under hypnosis with Dr. Benjamin Simon, Barney recalled that the binocular strap had broken when he ran from the UFO back to his car. He recalled driving the car away from the UFO, but afterward he felt irresistibly compelled to pull off the road and drive into the woods. He eventually sighted 6 men standing on the dirt road. The car stalled and 3 of the men approached the car. Barney described the beings as generally similar to Betty's hypnotic recollection. He said the beings stared into his eyes, terrifying, mesmerizing effect. During the first hypnosis session, Barney said, "Oh, those eyes, they're in my brain." And during his second hypnosis session, he said, "I was told to close my eyes because I saw 2 eyes coming close to mine, and I felt like the eyes had pushed into my eyes." He also said that, "All I see are these eyes. I'm not even afraid that they are not connected to a body. They are just there. They are just close up to me, pressing against my eyes." While Betty reported that her conversation with the leader of the men was concluded in English, Barney said that he heard them speaking in a mumbling language he did not understand. Betty also mentioned this detail. Barney said that the few times the aliens communicated with him, they were using telepathy. They communicated with him through thoughts. During Betty's sessions under hypnosis, Betty's account was similar to her aforementioned 5 dreams about the UFO abduction, with some notable differences. During her sessions, she was mainly focusing on her capture and release. Also, the technology of the craft in her memoir was a little bit different. The short men differed significantly in physical appearance, and the sequential order of the abduction also differed. Still, Betty's and Barney's memories in a hypnotic regression were consistent with one another. So let's take a look at the conclusions Dr. Simon came to during the hypnosis sessions. When the series of hypnosis sessions was complete, Dr. Simon wrote an article about the Hills for the journal Psychiatric Opinion, explaining his conclusion that the case was a singular psychological aberration. So that was his conclusion. Psychological aberration refers to the significant deviation from typical or normal mental functioning, often indicating a psychological disturbance or mental disorder. Now you have it. That's how far a qualified doctor has gone with evaluating what the couple shared with him during their hypnosis sessions. I can't blame Dr. Simon, as he had done this. He'd done his best to make his conclusions based only following the knowledge and guidelines he had acquired during his education. This system, though, definitely not going to encourage anyone in need to approach a psychiatrist for help. In 1965, due to multiple interviews and media appearances, the couple got international attention, which was followed by a book in 1966 written about Betty's and Barney's encounter by Dr. John G. Fuller, called The Interrupted Journey, which included a copy of a map drew by Betty and later became known as the Star Map. The book was a huge success and went through several printings. In 1968, an elementary school teacher and amateur astronomer, majoring in fish, read Fuller's book The Interrupted Journey, and fascinated by the star map, Fish wondered if it might be deciphered to determine which star system of the UFO came from. Assuming that one of the 15 stars of the map must represent the Earth's sun, Fish constructed a three-dimensional model of nearby sun-like stars using thread and beads, basing stellar distances on those published in the 1969 star catalog called Gliese Catalogue of Nearby Stars. Studying thousands of vantage points over several years, the only one that seemed to match the Hill map was from the viewpoint of the double star system of Zeta Reticuli, which is believed to be about 39 light years from Earth. Fish sent her analysis to a member of a National Investigation Committee of Aerial Phenomena, Water and Webb, who previously interviewed Betty and Barney. Water agreed with her conclusions and sent the map to Terence Dickinson, the editor of the magazine Astronomy. Dickinson did not endorse their conclusions, but for the first time in the journal's history, Astronomy invited comments and debate on a UFO report, starting with an opening article in December 1974 issue. For about a year afterward, the opinions page of Astronomy carried arguments for and against Fish's star map. Notable was an argument made by the world-famous astronomer, planetary scientist, and celebrated author Carl Sagan and astrophysicist Stephen Salter, arguing that the star map was little more than a random element of chance points. In an episode of Cosmos in 1980, Sagan demonstrated that with the lines drawn in the maps, the Hill map bore no resemblance to the real-life map. In contrast, those more favorable to the map, such as David Saunders, a statistician who had been on the Condon UFO study, disagreed. Saunders claimed that a match among 16 stars of a specific central type amongst the 1,000 stars nearest the Sun is at least 1,000 to 1. Jumping in time a little bit, in the early 1990s, the European High Precision Parallax Collecting Satellite, or Hipparcos mission, which more than 100,000 stars around the Sun, which studied more than 1,000 stars around the Sun more accurately than had previously been done, showed that some of the stars in Fish's interpretation of the map were in fact much farther away than previously thought, whilst other research revealed that some stars counted by Fish as likely to host life would have had to be excluded by her own criteria, while some of the stars which had been discounted by Fish have been recognized as potential bodies for life. Results such as these led Fish herself to reject her hypothesis in a public statement. This wasn't the last setback to the story of Betty and Barney, as American author and critic Jim MacDonald, who is a resident of the area in which the Hills claim to have been abducted, was produced a detailed analysis of their journey, which concludes that the episode was provoked by their misperceiving an aircraft warning beacon on Cannon Mountain as a UFO. MacDonald notes that from the road the Hills took, the beacon appears and disappears at the same time. The Hills describe the UFO as appearing and disappearing. MacDonald believed that the rest of the experience is regarded as stress, sleep deprivation, and false memories recovered under hypnosis, where he put the word recovered in sarcastic quotation marks. UFO expert Robert Schiffer's reaction to that was the Hills are the poster children for not driving when sleep deprived. In a skeptical Inquirer, Schaefer also wrote, "I was present at the National UFO Conference in New York City in 1980, at which Betty presented some of the UFO photos she had taken. She showed that must have been far more than 200 slides, mostly of blips, blurs, and blobs against a dark background. These were supposed to be UFOs coming in close, chasing her car, landing, etc." So Schaefer continued, "After her talk had exceeded about twice its allotted time, Betty was literally jeered off the stage by what had been at first a sympathetic audience. This incident, witnessed by many of the ufology's leaders and top activists, removed any lingering doubts about Betty's credibility. She had none." Then he continued, "In 1995, Betty Hill wrote a self-published book, A Common Sense Approach to UFOs. He's saying, "It's filled with delusional stories such as seeing entire squadrons of UFOs in flight and a truck levitating above the freeway." That was all from Mr. Schaefer, who later wrote that Betty Hill would go on UFO vigils at least 3 times a week. One evening she joined by UFO enthusiast John Oswald. When asked about Betty's continuing UFO observations, Oswald stated, "She's not really seeing UFOs, but she's calling them that." On one night they went out together. Mrs. Hill was unable to distinguish between a landed UFO and a street light. In a later interview, Schaefer recounts that Betty Hill wrote, "UFO are a new science, and our science cannot explain them." Still, Mr. Schaefer in 2015 released on the internet 84 pages of archive documents relating to Betty and Barney Hill and other UFO researchers. The documents were meant to discredit Betty, Barney, and other researchers' work. Well, it seems the biggest critic of Betty and Barney Hill, Mr. Robert Schaefer, dedicated significant time to discredit their story. So, what does it tell? To me, it tells only that Mr. Schaefer really wanted to ridicule the Hills. He remained their critic through many years, always finding something to discredit the story of the couple's encounter, and later personally Betty. He had a negative stance towards the Hills' story from the beginning, and after the death of Barney Hill, he used every opportunity to challenge Betty. Shall I call this man a balanced critic of others, or someone who just looking for the slightest mistake made by others, which he later exploit? Is it possible that due to what happened to her and Barney, through the years, Betty became a bit biased towards UFOs and UFO sightings? As she stated, she had been abducted by aliens. Non-human beings conducted experiments on her and her husband. An encounter like this would leave a very strong imprint on everyone. It would change the life of every person who would experience such a thing. I assume Mr. Robert Schaefer wouldn't be an exception. Is it strange then, if someone who had such an experience seeks answers and during this search might make a mistake or two, might see UFO even when every other person would see just a street lamp or a light signal? No, I don't think it would be strange. I think these people have every reason to see UFOs even when they would be looking at something completely different, as these people have experienced something really special, something that others who have never been experienced anything like that can only imagine. And I believe that Betty Hill was a believer. She was a believer as a result of an encounter with an extraterrestrial aircraft and an extraterrestrial being or beings who later conducted experiments on her and her husband. She was a believer because she not only spotted aliens but got direct contact with them, communicated with them, and she was able to share her story with the wider community. Would the lack of this experience fuel Mr. Schaefer's crusade against Betty Hill and other UFO believers? Probably only Mr. Schaefer could answer this question. I don't think he's a bad man. I don't think he's a bad man who just wants to discredit UFO believers just for the sake of ridiculing these people. I think Mr. Schaefer, similarly to Dr. Simon, who conducted the hypnosis sessions with Betty and Barney and later ascribed it to a mental disorder, just trying his best to explain things, mysteries and phenomena with the knowledge he acquired during his years of research. Who knows, he might be going to have a chance to experience a close encounter with a UFO or aliens, and then he might going to be able to understand why Betty wanted so much to reassure herself again and again, sometimes maybe seeing an everyday object as it was a UFO. Science called this pareidolia. Pareidolia is not a hallucination, but rather the brain's natural tendency to find familiar patterns and meanings in ambiguous stimuli. Sounds good. In modern days, time to time, more critics have arisen in the media to explain the story of the Hills with anything but a UFO encounter. Worth mentioning the theory of Martin Kottmeyer, who suggested in 1990 that Barney's memories revealed under hypnosis might have been influenced by an episode of science fiction and anthology series The Outer Limits, which had been broadcast on the 10th of February 1964, about 2 weeks before Barney's first hypnotic session. The episode featured an unnamed extraterrestrial with large eyes who says, "In all universes, in all unities beyond the universes, all who have eyes that speak." Well, the report from the regression featured a scenario that was in some respects similar to the television show. In part, he wrote, "Wraparound eyes are an extremely rarity in science fiction films. I know of only one instance. They appeared on an alien of an episode of an old TV series, The Outer Limits, the Barello Shield." A person familiar with Barney's sketch in the Interrupted Journey, the sketch done in collaboration with the artist David Baker, will find a frisson of déjà vu creeping up his spine when seeing this episode. The resemblance is much abetted by an absence of ears, hair and nose on both aliens. Could it be by chance? Consider this: Barney first described and drew the wraparound eyes during the hypnosis session dated 22nd of February. The Barello Shield was first broadcast on the 10th of February. Only 12 days separate the two instances. And he goes on. Later on in 2012, an American author, Jason Colavito, related the Hills recovered memories of aliens in shiny black jackets to a Twilight Zone episode, which aired in January 31st of January in 2064. Yes, a few weeks before the first hypnosis sessions. Well, could this be an explanation of why the aliens described by the Hills in a certain way during their hypnosis sessions? Maybe, but apart from some similarities between the TV aliens and the ones described by the Hills, I couldn't say they shared everything in common, as the couple's description rather resembled the so-called grey aliens. Even if their description had been 100% match, would it be able to prove that the encounter didn't happen, or only that the memories, even if the source of the memories is a TV show, could influence the recall of memories during hypnosis? These theories are reassuring for the skeptics who would want to prove their truth. Otherwise, their whole view of the world would change, and they would have to admit that they were wrong all the time. I don't say they're right, I don't say they're wrong. But this definitely cannot prove that the abduction did not happen. Well, approaching the end of this video, let's mention that Barney died of a stroke in 1969 at the age of only just 46. He was only 46. It happened 8 years after the encounter, whilst Betty died of cancer in 2004 at the age of 85. So, their story remains the most well-known alien abduction story, which still inspires researchers, musicians, and filmmakers. So, if you have a chance to drive down Route 3 in New Hampshire, stop for a minute at a scenic picnic area south of Twin Mountains, where it all started, and look towards the sky, as it is full of miracles and mystery. Thank you for watching this video.